views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. If you were with us last week, you saw that we took a look backwards before we take a look forward to 2022 when it comes to a new borough president. If you were with us the week before, we took a look at what the city council might look like in 2022. So this evening, before we get to the end of the year, we thought it would be appropriate to take a look at what the state legislature is going to be looking like and what the plans of your elected officials are for 2022. So we invited a representative from the state Senate and a representative from the state Assembly to join us. And let's say hello to Luis Sepúlveda, who is the senator in the 32nd Senatorial District. Senator, nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Gary. It was a great pleasure to be on your program. It's been many, many appearances now. So
we were talking about that. We were talking about that before the show. I'm going to do a count, and I'll need more than my 10 fingers probably to do that. I don't know if he's been on as often, but he has been on our program before. It's Michael Benedetto from the 82nd Assembly District. Assemblyman, nice to have you with us, sir.
Always a pleasure to be here, Gary. And no, I haven't been here all that often. As a matter of fact, I think the last time I was here, Joe Torre had just been fired by George Steinbrenner.
Wow.
So it's been a while.
I think you've been here since. I'm going to go look that up and figure that out. Nonetheless, we have a bunch of serious things to deal with. Let's start right away with what's out there, what's on everybody's mind. I saw a list of elected officials. In fact, we had invited another elected official to join us tonight, but she couldn't make it because she tested positive. Elected officials are testing positive. One of our staff is tested positive. I called my doctor's office the other day just to get some lab results for myself. And the receptionist said, "Gary, are you calling about COVID?" And I said, "No." And she said, "The last 5 calls I've gotten are Bronx people with COVID." Senator, where are we at? What's going on in your district? How concerned are you? Give us just your point of view on this emerging issue in the Bronx and New York City.
Well, no, Gary, we're doing much better than we were at the inception of COVID, but our numbers still aren't as good as the rest of the city. As usually is the case, communities of color, our communities don't have the kind of healthcare systems that other communities, wealthier communities have. And therefore, when it comes to these kinds of infectious diseases like COVID, generally speaking, our community suffers the most. Most of the deaths in our communities, most of the deaths of COVID were in Black and brown communities. And I suspect that with Omicron and what's happening now, that you're going to see the same kind of numbers, even though they're much better. But I'm very concerned. We have been pushing at my office and with my other colleagues to get people tested. We're pushing to get more test sites. We're pushing to get more people to get tested and more people to get vaccinated. We've been working with great organizations, healthcare organizations in the county, like Urban Health Plan, like BronxTalk, and many others, creating a system where we can get people vaccinated as soon as they call our office. We ask them to call them and to make sure that they get an appointment and make sure they follow up on these appointments, because it's pretty scary. Luckily, a lot of people are vaccinated, so it's causing less hospitalizations, less deaths, and less issues with hospitals. But I'm still very concerned about the numbers that we'll be seeing recently, because many of my colleagues, many of my friends, family members have tested positive. A member of my staff tested positive. And it's a frightening situation, but hopefully the experiences we had since the beginning of this have taught us better. We can handle it and manage it much better.
It's incredibly ironic because the largest industry in the Bronx is healthcare, and yet we seem to be on the lower end of the spectrum. Is this a matter of resources? Is this a matter of you and your colleague in the assembly saying, hey, we need a bigger piece of the pie? I believe, and I've done a number of interviews here, people of color have been most suspicious about the vaccines, so many of them are not vaccinated. Is it awareness about social distance and wearing the masks? I mean, what's the issue that makes you say, we're getting the worst of it?
Well, I can tell you that we're doing much better than we did when COVID started. We're very concerned about the Omicron strain. We're seeing that many of my colleagues, many of my friends are now positive of COVID. One of my staff members came back positive. I'm very concerned because apparently it spreads a lot easier. Fortunately, many more people are vaccinated, have received the booster, are wearing masks. So the impact that it's had in terms of death and hospitalization has been minimal. But I still want to see more people get vaccinated. I still want to make sure that people are getting their booster shots and wearing masks, because that's the only way we're going to prevent this from getting out of control again. Our healthcare systems are better prepared for it. And so I'm much more hopeful that it won't become the kind of crisis that led to many people in communities of color. In fact, most deaths were in communities of color. And so I'm hopeful that you won't have that happen again. And certainly I'm working with my colleagues in government to make sure that we have more testing sites. We have more sites for vaccinations and booster shots, and making sure that people get masks. And if they don't have it, we will give it to them. But we're working in unison with our healthcare providers to make sure that people are better prepared, and won't get sick with COVID or won't be hospitalized or possibly die from this terrible new strain that's coming. So we're working hard.
Senator, one of the things that I've always thought was ironic is that in the borough of the Bronx, our largest industry is healthcare, and yet we saw it the first go around, and maybe even now, we get hit hardest. Communities of color, Black and brown communities seem to get hit hardest. There's a lot of distrust of the medical institutions, and I've talked to people even on this program who said they're not going to get vaccinated because they don't trust what's out there. How do we look at that, and how do we turn things around so that everybody can be safer and healthier?
Okay, I can tell you, Gary, even people within my own family that just don't want to accept the scientific evidence and data that's out there. There's no big secret. I think something about 98.6% of people who have died, especially recently, were not vaccinated. We don't know why people. I know part of it is that the Republican fear-mongering machine, misinformation machine, has been at excessive high speed, doing primarily a disservice to many people in our community, and people buy into this nonsense that somehow that the vaccine messes with your DNA and creates all these other problems. A lot of misinformation about what the vaccine does. And when you have what appears to be credible people that are elected in high positions, people that have high profile, when you have people providing this level of misinformation, it contributes to what we have seen. It contributes to the 800,000 deaths that we've had since the inception of COVID. And while you have people like this pumping this terrible misinformation into the airways, into the media, any chance, into social media, you're going to have people that doubt. And it's unfortunate because all of the scientific data clearly establishes that if you're vaccinated, that if you wear masks, you're not as much at risk.
Assembly member, let's talk to you about your district. What do you see? Are people getting vaccinated? Are people able to access testing? Of course, the president has been talking about making testing more available. Tell me what your experience is and your concerns are.
Yes, well, we're all concerned with this. This has been a terrible year and a half plus that we've gone through. And I'm very proud to say that during the course of that time, I have not closed up my office at all. And fortunately, it's worked out well. My staff has remained healthy, and we stay there to service, the people who need the service. I applaud the actions of the state government, the city government, for what they've been doing. So, for instance, just this afternoon in the Bay Plaza Mall, they have reopened the testing site that was there for well over a year. And during the course of that year was quite busy testing people. So that is now a need that is being fulfilled. We've had the vaccination vans coming to my office on several occasions already for testing purposes, to give booster shots if necessary. So we're very happy to say that people have been coming to the van, getting their vaccination, and I think for the most part they are vaccinated in my area. But unfortunately, I think the senator is absolutely right. There is a large contingent of people who are spreading false rumors and making doubt come into the minds of many people. Maybe there was something terrible going on, and they are not to be trusted, these vaccines. It's just terrible that this has happened. And further, it's being compounded by everything that's being put out there on the internet, and spreading these rumors even more. But
let me just interject. While the internet can provide really good information, it also tends to, social media, provide false information that gets spread. Let's talk about schools, and that's a big thing now. I guess the first question is, because you're Assemblyman, you're the chair of the Assembly's Education Committee. Number one, are you happy with the appointment of the new chancellor? And number two, what do you recommend in schools? Should we close them? Should we mandate vaccinations? How do you see our schools moving forward in the future?
Well, I would hate to see schools closed. I mean, if you're going to be teaching kids, you got to have kids in person. That's the way to keep their attention. That's the way they're going to learn. But I have to put confidence in the health officials, in the people running our city, who are gathering the statistics that schools are being kept open, because they are being kept open safely for the kids, safely for the teachers, safely for the kids' parents. Okay. Once this goes in a different direction, well, then you have to go back to remote learning again, and I really don't want that.
Do you have confidence that do you have confidence that David Banks is the right guy to lead this and make decisions? Are you happy with?
Optimistic. I put a little. Listen, we elect people, and we elect them because we have confidence in their judgment, and in the judgment of Mayor-elect Adams. He has selected Mr. Banks to be the new chancellor. I've got to put my confidence in him, that he has appointed a good person who's going to lead the Board of Education down a good path.
Mandate vaccinations for teachers and staff, and mandate either negative tests or vaccinations for kids.
I would like to see that happen. I agree.
Senator, your thoughts on that?
Well, on the new chancellor, we've had so many different chancellors in the city of New York over the last few years, and they come in, we have high expectations, and then for some reason or other, we get disappointed, or something happens where they can't fulfill their agenda. Whether Mr. Banks is the right person, that remains to be seen. I will do everything possible to make sure that he succeeds, anything that I can do. But when it comes to that position, we've been disappointed so many times that I'm somewhat cynical and somewhat, I'm not as 100% convinced yet of any particular chancellor that would have been selected. All I hope is that he realizes that if in fact we have to go to virtual learning, that he learned, or he researched or studied what we did before, where, again, poor communities, students of color suffered the most. They didn't have the Wi-Fi, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the tablets. In my district, there were many schools where to this day, many of the kids didn't get those tablets, or got tablets that were defective. It's a monumental task. It's almost like a military quartermaster. And
Right.
if we haven't learned from the mistakes that we made before, if we haven't created a system that guarantees that our kids are going to get technology that's necessary for them to go virtual, if we haven't figured out at what rate do we mandate vaccines, at what rate do we mandate vaccines for our teachers, because we're not protecting our children, obviously, is a number one.
I want to
protect our teachers.
I want to ask you about, and we'll start with the Assemblyman about, you talked about, technology. A lot of that goes with funding. The campaign for fiscal equity is something that happened, that was decided, and yet there's great concern that the monies didn't go and are not going where they're supposed to. I know, Assemblyman, you have taken a strong stand on that. Where are we at so that what Senator Sepúlveda just said, our kids are not getting the technology they're supposed to have? That's a cash thing. We have the money, we could do it. What are your thoughts about where we're at with, which I can't believe because we covered this 20 years ago. What are your thoughts about the campaign for fiscal equity at this point?
Yes,
getting those monies
Gary,
where they got to go.
You asked that. Last budget, we allocated more money than's ever been allocated in the state of New York towards education. We have committed that we will fund the mandate for the campaign for fiscal equity over the next 2 more years. Okay, we put up $1.4 billion last budget. We're going to do the same this year, and we're looking forward to do the same the year after, which will complete our obligation that the courts have ordered towards education in the state of New York. There have been, fortunately, and I'm very proud that it was underneath my watch, that we have given an influx of tremendous amount of money to education in the state of New York.
So then you'll do me a favor and you'll make sure that Senator Sepúlveda's schools get that funds so that they can get on the same page as everybody else when it comes to technology. I say Gary, that tongue in cheek, but I mean that seriously.
Gary, there's no doubt. Michael has been a war horse when it comes to a campaign for fiscal equity and getting money into our schools. He's a Bronx Assemblyman, and I'm so happy that he's the chair of the Assembly. But it's not just getting the funding. You can get a lot of money and still have a level of incompetence that our kids are not going to get something as simple as Wi-Fi. We have, for example, I have several of my schools in my district where over 35% of the kids are living in homeless shelters with their families. They don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have the tablets. So yes, we can get all the money in the world, but if we don't have a competent team to make sure that this technology easily flows to our kids, we're still going to be at a disadvantage.
I want to change gears a little bit, and this goes right into
Gary. Just let me, step in here for a moment. Louis, absolutely right. We can and we have set the money down from Albany for the schools to do the right thing. But now it's up to the school administrators for the chancellor to use this money wisely
and to get it where it's got to go. I want to make sure to get this in. This is just so important. The city council voted to improve non-citizen voting, and this falls right into what Senator Sepúlveda has been working on. He was the sponsor of the Green Light New York bill that gave all immigrants, the opportunity to get driver's license. Presumably you like what the city council did, but it's very controversial. Many people are saying, wait a minute, this is a fundamental thing in America. You've got to be a citizen in order to vote. Senator, is it even constitutional for the city to create a voting law that doesn't go through the state legislature? So we'll start there. And of course, the Assemblyman can weigh in on that as well.
Well, let's keep in mind that there are other municipalities that have voting rights for people that are lawful immigrants, and it hasn't been this disaster that people predicted. Look, I'm still on the fence as to how I feel about it. Obviously, many of the individuals that that would benefit from this are people that live in my community. And many of them do pay taxes. They pay into our system, and they should. If you do, you should get some benefits. Maybe voting is one of them. But as an attorney, as a professor who teaches constitutional law in colleges, there is something to say about being a citizen and that granting you the right to vote in an election. So I still want to see how it plays out. My support is not automatic. My resistance is not automatic. I want to see what happens if, in fact, it reaches that point. But I do think there are going to be some constitutional issues that are going to be, obviously, the Republican Party is going to go to court and challenge it.
Could go all the way to the Supreme Court.
I'm still on the fence.
Could be. Assemblyman, your thoughts about the city council making that vote?
Well, a lot of people forget that before we did away with school boards, non-citizens were allowed to vote in those school board elections back when, and it worked very well. I agree with the senator. The constitutionality of the law is definitely in question, and it's definitely going to go to court. It's worked before. Maybe the courts would allow, according to the state constitution, it talks to citizens being allowed to vote. Okay. That seems to be the sticking point here, but it's not the end of the world if this is passed and allowed to go through the courts.
The question that I want to ask is taxation without representation. These are people who pay taxes, yet they don't have a vote. That's a fundamental precept of American democracy. I want to move ahead to, we've got a lot of issues. Assemblyman, we'll start with you. Many people are concerned that bail reform was good and the right thing, because we don't want another precept is you're innocent till proven guilty, and you shouldn't go to jail if until you've been proven guilty. On the other hand, there are many people who say, the judges need a little more discretion to be able to make a decision of whether this particular defendant should be, remain incarcerated. Do you believe at this point we need to revisit the bail reform law and tweak it? That's for you, Assemblyman.
A great, a terrible thing was taking place here in the state of New York, where people who are poor and were unable to put forth enough money to make bail were kept in prisons. Okay, these are thousands and thousands of people whose lives were ruined before they were tried. Okay, what we tried to do was to rectify the abuses of the past. Might we have gone too far? Well, it's possible. And would I possibly be open to re-looking at some of the laws we passed? Yeah, sure. Okay, but we rectified something that was just terrible when it came to the lives of thousands of people. I'm very proud that we reformed bail.
So at this point, you say, I would consider it, depending on how it's presented.
I would
Senator, your thoughts about re-looking at bail reform? What do you think?
Oh, Gary, this is something that, I was one of the 8 senators that the leader appointed into a committee to create bail, the criminal justice reform package in general, but especially bail reform and the reform of the reform. And this is an issue that, again, the Republican Party, they're great at fear mongering, but they're terrible at solutions. And anytime they've challenged the law, any evidence they present just comes back and bites them in the face. The commissioner of New York City Police attempted to tie bail reform to a rise in crime, and he went before a public hearing in the Assembly, and he couldn't make a single connection, not a single connection, to the increase in certain crimes and bail reform. Just recently, a couple of days ago, one of the candidates, Republican candidates for governor, had a press conference where he tried to use an article by NPR to support their positions that bail reform was this terrible thing. And the reality is that the article proved that bail reform worked. There are many jurisdictions in the United States that did not have bail reform, and yet they had a significant rise in crime. New York State, the first year of bail reform, crime went up 0.7%, less than 1%. I believe there were 361 violent crimes. A year after bail reform, there were 363 violent crimes, so 2 additional ones.
So it sounds like pretty clear that your conclusion at the moment is we don't need to reform the reform.
Gary, I don't believe in anecdotal evidence. I believe that you look at what the evidence provides, and the evidence overwhelmingly supports the position that bail reform was the right thing. Only one person between the passing of the law and the first 7 months was released that was involved in a shooting, and that was a study done by the Post, the New York Post, which is not, a lefty liberal.
Right. Before we run out of time, I do want to, I know, Senator, you had on your mind, you wanted to talk about redistricting and concern it. You hear all kinds of things, you see all kinds of different maps. It appears that New York State could lose a congressional representative. Where are we at as far as redistricting? And then we'll let the Assemblyman weigh in on that as well.
Well, I mean,
got about a minute each to do that.
We're going to lose a seat. That's a given already. However, my concern is that some of us, including Assemblyman Benedetto, we have had relationships with certain communities within our lines, within our political lines, for many, many years. And you look some of the proposals right now, areas that I have invested and worked diligently with the community were removed from my senatorial district, which is unfortunate. Look, we have to have a fair system, clearly. But we can't have a system where we don't take into consideration the relationship, the work that elected officials have done in these communities, because it's unfair to our constituents, and most importantly, it's unfair to our communities. We know where the issues are in many of these communities, and we should remain there. That's not to say that there shouldn't be some redistricting, but we have to take into consideration the work that we've done in our communities.
Assemblyman, we'll give you about a minute to respond to that. Where are you as far as redistricting?
You want to keep communities that have traditionally been kept together the same way. I remember 10 years ago when they did redistricting, and they had independent groups coming up with different maps. And my district was, they made it a shore community going up into Westchester and taking in parts of Mamaroneck and Eastchester, which had no relation whatsoever to my Bronx communities. The traditional communities that have been together should kept
stay together
as much as possible.
Assemblymember Michael Benedetto, thank you so much for joining us this evening from the 82nd Assembly District. Senator Luis Sepúlveda, thank you once again for being on BronxTalk from the 32nd Senatorial District. Too many issues, never enough time. We'll have you back. 2022 is going to be a long year, and we'll have you back to keep having this dialogue again. We appreciate your time this evening. And next week, we're going to do a very special show. It'll be our New Year's show. We're going to go wandering New York, technically wandering the Bronx, with some of the best photographs of the year of our neighborhoods. So we'll do that next week. Have a good holiday. Stay safe. Wear your mask. Get vaccinated. Do all the right things. And we'll see you next week. Good night.